Now we are going to discuss regarding a pseudocode, that what is a pseudocode. Pseudocode is basically a way that how I can design an algorithm. First of all, is that it is not itself a programming language. It's just a certain criteria that how I design an algorithm. When it comes to a pseudocode, we use some selection statements and selection keywords like I have is if and then. I discussed with you in the class that these are basically an example of a loops, and this is also available in your flowchart, and this is also available in your pseudocode as well. So the question is in the flowchart is replaced with if and the question mark with then. So this basically means that if this is a certain condition that what you are designated to do. For example, if your age is greater than 18, then you need to output that you are old enough. This is just an example. This is basically some examples of conditional statements. Conditional statement means that if the certain criteria, the certain condition is true or not. If it is true, then what should I do? And if it is not, then what I should do, right? So if age is greater than 18, you can do this, or if age is less than 18, then you should output that. So these are some examples of your pseudocode. These are the this is the example of a loop. Just right here, you can see that this is a condition, right? I have written that if age is greater than 18. So this is going to work like this is a program. So for example, if I enter here age 20, if I enter here, if I input here age 50, so that age is greater than 18. This condition is true. So it is going to output you that yes, you are old enough. However, if I gave you another example where you have the option of else. Now, you can see that if your age is greater than 18, then you can output you are old enough, else you can output that you are not old enough. We can even have multiple conditions as well, and these multiple conditions can be created using the else if statements, where each condition has its own else if statement. So these can be worked like when I add multiple conditions into it. Like for example, if condition one is true, you can follow this. If it is not true, you can go on to the next condition. If the second condition is not true, then you can go on to the third condition. If the third condition is not true, then you can go on to the fourth condition and so on. So that's how it actually works, right? So multiple conditions, I just mean to say that for example, I have the nested if statements. Nested if statements are only going to be utilized when you are working with more than one type of condition. Like for example, you can see here that if your cost is greater than equals to 100, then you have to output that that is too far too expensive. If this condition is true, then it's okay. However, if it's not true, then we go on to this else if condition, that now if your cost is greater than 80 or not, then you can output that. And again, if this condition is not true, then you can move on to the third condition. Then you can move on to the fourth condition. Then you can move on to the fifth condition. So as you can see that as I'm moving on to more number of conditions, I'm using this else if, else if, else if. Whereas in my last condition, I only ended with an and I output whatever the statement is going to be. So the whenever you are working with multiple conditions in a pseudocode, so you are going to use else if. So you can even put an else on the end in that case. For example, each of the conditions are checked in order they are written. If one condition is true, then the code that is within it runs, and then it jumps to the end. However, if that certain condition is not true, it goes on to like the other conditions. So am I clear to you? Do you have any confusions?
Yes, sir, it's clear, no confusion.
Now, I'm referring to the second statement that is case of otherwise end case, right? This is also an example of a selection statement. So you need to understand that. When I am referring to selectional statement, that means that I am using two types of statements, right? That is either an if then else and if, and that is either in case of otherwise and case. So this is going to be used when you are checking the value of one variable and you have many different values. So these are basically like cases. Case can be given an example of, like, for example, if you are calling on an international service operator onto any given number. So whenever you attend that call, the operator says that, like, for example, if you want to speak in English, you can press 1. If you want to speak in Arabic, you can press 2. If you want to contact your operator, the helpline, you can press 0. So now here you have three cases. You can either press 1, you can either press 2, or you can either press 0. Important thing to learn is that each and every case have a task that is designated to that. Like, for example, if I press 1, it says that it speaks in English. If I speak 2, it says that it speaks in Arabic. And if I speak in 0, it goes me to that Arabic, it goes me to that operator. So whenever you have a number of cases, like for example, case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. So this is the place where I use the case of otherwise and case. When writing the pseudocode, the first thing you need to learn is your selectional conditional statements, and you have two types of those. The very first type is the if, then, else, and if, and the second one is the case of otherwise and case. So for example, as you can see here, that case use keywords such as select, and followed by the identifier of the variable, it has the case. Like for example, it says that select menu choices, and if you select the case 1, it outputs you that you selected case 1. If you selected case 2, it outputs you have selected case 2. If you have selected case 3, it outputs that you have selected case number 3. So this is an example of conditional statements that you have three different cases. We can perform a case statements whenever we are making comparisons. However, it's up to you that what comparison or what value you should select, right? Like for example, here is another program of the same example, case of otherwise and case, and you can see here that I have first of all selected age. Now the number of cases are right here. This is case 1, this is case 2, this is case 3, and this is case 4. Now it says that if your age is less than 18, this is your case number 1. And if your age is less greater than equals to 12, or if your age is less than 15, then you need to output that. Again, if your age is greater than 15 and if your age is less than 18, then you need to output that. And again, if your age is greater than 18, you need to output that. So this is an example of case of otherwise, right? For example, you can see here as well that here I have three cases. This is a subtraction case, this is a multiplication case, and this is a division case. You can see that if anyone selected the subtraction case, what is going to happen? Both of the values that are entered into your program, they are going to be subtracted. And if you are as selecting the multiplication part, that means that both of them are going to be multiplied. If you're going to select the division part, this means that both of them are going to be divided. And if you have select none of them, that it is going to output invalid symbol. So you should be clear about how you can create a flow chart on your own with those specific symbols. You should be able to know that what is the difference between a flowchart and a pseudocode. You should be knowing that how can you create a pseudocode using two selectional statements, and you should be also be knowing that how you can incorporate pseudocode into your flowcharts. So do you have any confusions up till here?
No, sir, no confusion.
You need to practice it at your home. You need to work on these examples. You need to learn that how you are going to write these. I certainly cannot help you to practice, but just after my class, what you need to do is you need to work on these codes, right? You need to work on these questions that I gave to you as well, right? You can also
Hmm.
follow here the questions that your teacher is giving you. Right, for example, here are some questions. It says that how many arrows must come out of a selection symbol in a flowchart. You need to understand that whenever it's a decision making symbol, they have always two arrows. Decision making symbol is a selectional diamond. It states that if your condition is true, that means that you need to do this. If it is not true, then you need to do the other side. Then you need to define what is selection. Then you also need to work out on these expressions. I just explain you what does this exclamation mark stands for. So is this clear to you?
Yes, sir.
Now the next thing that we are going to discuss is our loops. So can you define me what are loops?
Loops are mean like they are repetition in which the same piece of code is run several times.
Mm-hmm. So a loop basically means that it is a repetition. Repetition means that you are doing the same thing again and again and again and again, and you are working on to the same thing again and again. That means that the technical term for loops or repetition is to be known as iterations. A loop means repetition, doing the same thing again and again several times, which means that it is going into it again and again and again and again until that certain condition is this true. Another word or technical term for loop is an iteration. What is an iteration? An iteration is a loop to repeat a section of code for a fixed number of times until a required outcome is achieved. That means that you need to repeat that specific section of code again and again and again and again until your fixed number of times or outcome is reached, right? Like for example, I want to repeat a program, a loop for 100 times. So that means that it has to repeat 100 times. It has to be iterated 100 times. Another word for repetition is iteration. Iteration means that you need to repeat that section of code for a fixed number of times or until that certain outcome is achieved. Now we are going to discuss that loops are mainly used in two specific scenarios. First of all, you know that how many times you want to repeat the code. Like you have that certain knowledge that, sir, I want to repeat this code for 10 times or 20 times or so on that. So you can use a loop because you know it. This might be a 10 times or the times that you know it. So for example, you can say that I want to repeat it X times. X time means that any value that is stored into an variable X, it has to be repeated that times. And what is a variable? A variable is a data placeholder that changes its values throughout the execution of a program. Or you either know that if I want to repeat it 10 times or 20 times. So this is the first condition or case or scenario that a loop could be used. And this loop is known as a count controlled loop. That means you know that how many times your loop is going to be repeated, and your loop is controlled by the number of counts. You know it already prior, right? The second scenario where the loops are used, the technical term for loops are iteration, is now when you don't know the number of times that you want to repeat it, but you have something in your mind, right? For example, you say that, sir, if this happens, or if this condition is true, or if this meets okay, or like you say that, sir, if this happens, that means that I'm going to stop it. But you do not know that when it is going to be happen. So when you don't know the number of times when you want to repeat, and you only know that until something happens, so this is to be known as a condition control loop. So what you are going to do, you are going to add a condition into it, and you are going to refer, okay, sir, if this condition is true, that means that the loop will be ended, and if it is not true, it will keeps on running. So that means that your loop is not being controlled by the number of counts that you added. It is being controlled by a condition. So this is to be known as a condition control loop. And what is a condition control loop? A condition control loop is a loop that runs based on a condition, not the number of times it will run. And when it comes to a count control loop, this means a loop where you know the number of times it will be running. So, do you got it? Do you have any confusions in loops?
I got it, sir.
Now, the second thing that we are going to discuss is the count control loops in a flowchart. So this type of loops needs a counter to keep a track of the number of repetitions, number of iterations you have done, or the number of loops. The counter is going to be a variable. So before you start the loop, the counter needs to have a starting value, so that you should know that how many times it has to be started, and it is going to be increment as the counter works. Like for example, if you can see right here that I started this loop and I ended this loop. The second thing that I just did here is I entered when your num is equals to 0, and when your number is greater than 5. That means that if your number is greater than 5, that means you can stop it. And if your number is not greater than 5, that means that you have to output a number, and then now you are going to move on to your second number. Just keeps on checking it again and again and again and again to check that if your number is greater than 5, and if it is greater than 5, it ends the program. If it is not greater than 5, it increments one value to your count and number. So this is an example of a repetition in a flowchart. Do you have any confusions here?
No, sir. I understand.
Again, now while discussing the pseudocodes, now if I specifically talks you about count control loops, we have discussed this right here that whenever it is a count control loop, that means that I know the number of counts that I'm working on. So a for loop is an example of a count loop. You need to know what number to start with and when you are going to end it. For example, 1 to 10. And this loop keeps on incrementing each time through. Increment means that when you add 1 to something. And for loop is an example of a count control loop. How is that? We can see an example right here that this is a variable. The variable counter starts at 0 and continues until it is 0. So you are going to write it like for counter 0 till 9. Remember that this counter is like a number of counters that you are adding through, like count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4, count 5, count 6, count 7, count 8, count 9, count 10, like this. It is going to go like this. So you can type that for how what are the number of counts that you have, either from 1 to 10, either from 0 to 9, right? So this is a count control loop. For counter 0 to 9, output counter, and then you have his next counter. So it is going to work like, let me show you the dry run of this. It says for counter 0 to 9, output counter. Output, so first of all, your counter is going to be counter 1. It is going to output counter. Then 2, it is going to output counter. Then 3, it is going to output counter, whatever the value is in counter. Then 4, and so on until it goes for 6, 7, 8, 9. Because when it comes to 9, it is going to show you 9 out of 9. Is this clear to you?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
You can complete these practical activities at your home as well, and also work on this work example 4.09, where you have to convert the flowchart into pseudocode. This is a pseudocode, so you should know that and when I'm referring to a flowchart, I'm only referring to the symbols, and
Yes.
I'm using the same pseudocode language. Symbols we have already discussed. Here are some number of questions as well. I'm sure that you can complete them. What is iteration? I just discussed with you. What is a count control loop? You can also do this. What is appropriate to use when it is appropriate to use a counter control loop? Yes, you know it. What three elements do you need in a count control loop? You can work on these and submit it to me. Now, condition controlled loops. So, what are condition control loops? We have discussed this as well, but a condition control loop has the same structure as a count control loop, but it does not needs a counting variable because something else is controlling it. However, a condition control loop is where when you can see that when you have a certain condition. Right here, you can see that the flowchart starts here. You are adding your age, and if your age is greater than equals to 18, that means that you need to print you are old enough. And if it is not 18, then this loops goes back again, and your program is again started. The following flowchart is an example of a repeat until loop. Now, when it comes to a condition control loop, that means that now I'm referring to some more number of loops. The loop that we are going to discuss now is an repeat until loop. And repeat until loop is, first of all, this is an example of a condition control loop. Second thing is that It is an example of an iteration loop because it's itself a loop. And repeat until means that you are repeating the same task again and again, again and again, again and again until that certain condition is true, right? So, for example, as you can see that this is a type of a condition control loop. The code inside the loop will always run once. However, it is going to end if the condition is true. So for example, it starts and you have the value 1. The value 1 is multiplied by 2, and if your value is greater than equals to 100, then it stops. If it is not, then it goes back again. So you can actually see an impact of this, that this is going again and again, again and again. So these are basically your condition control loops, as I was discussing earlier. In your syllabus, you have two types of condition control loop. The one is the repeat until loop. The second is the while loop. Now, when it comes to a repeat until loop, you know it that it is a condition control loop and it runs until that condition is true. Whereas if I give you the example of a while loop, this is a condition control loop that runs while the condition is true. So that is the big difference between both of them. In repeat until, you are only running your loop until your condition is true. In while do and while, you are only running your loop while the condition is true. So for example, here is the example that in this example, you can see that this loop is continuing again and again. For example, age is 0 now. Any value that you enter into age, if that this is less than 18, that means now you are going to input the age and you are going to end it. So do you understand the basic difference between repeat until and while loop?
Yes, I understand.
Can you define me what is the difference between them?
In a repeat until loop, the process is repeated until a certain condition is met,
Hmm.
and in the other one, it is repeated until it has been repeated a certain number of times.